Welcome back to the Deep Dive. Today, we are opening up a stack of sources detailing one of the most critical, chaotic, and frankly frustrating near misses of World War II.
We are diving deep into the 20 July plot. You probably know it best by its operational codename, Operation Valkyrie.
Right. This was the final, the most famous, and definitely the closest anyone got to actually assassinating Adolf Hitler and staging a full coup against the Nazi regime. It all happened on July 20 in 1944.
Yeah, and when people think Valkyrie, they often picture this sort of last-ditch, desperate act in 44.
Exactly. But the sources we've got here, they reveal something else entirely. This wasn't spontaneous at all.
Not even close. It was really the culmination of, 6 years of plotting, planning, failed attempts, all carried out by this really complex, sometimes contradictory group within the German establishment itself.
So our mission today is, well, it's an exhaustive analysis. We want to go beyond the headlines. Yeah?
Absolutely. We need to scrutinize every single detail, everything, from the absolute earliest roots of military resistance way back to the tiniest moments on the day itself.
Like a few seconds delay here, a misplaced briefcase there. Things that actually determine the failure of the whole thing.
Exactly. We need to understand not just what happened, but really why every single piece of their, honestly, quite intricate plan just failed to get the momentum it needed.
Okay, so to really get the stakes in 1944, we have to go back, way back. This opposition wasn't just born out of desperation after, say, Stalingrad.
No, the roots go much deeper. You're saying back to 1938.
At least, you have high-ranking figures who saw Hitler's recklessness years before the war even started. These weren't fringe elements initially.
We're talking about people inside the Wehrmacht establishment. Major General Hans Oster, right? Head of military intelligence, the Abwehr.
Yes, Oster. And Colonel General Ludwig Beck, he was the former chief of staff of the army, a really respected figure. Field Marshal Erwin von Witzleben, too.
And their early focus was stopping a war they thought Germany couldn't win.
Primarily, yes. It was about preventing what they thought as a catastrophic gamble. And they weren't alone. They had links to civilian intellectuals and elites, like Karl Gordeler, the former mayor of Leipzig.
Gordeler, yes, a key conservative figure, and also the sort of intellectual resistance hub, the Kreisauer Kreis, with people like Helmuth James von Moltke.
Okay, but you mentioned contradictions. This wasn't a unified group, was it?
Not at all. And this is crucial for understanding why things often stalled. There was a deep, deep schism, especially over the morality of killing Hitler.
Ah, right. The assassination question.
Moltke, for instance, was absolutely against it. He argued it would basically poison any post-Hitler government they tried to set up.
His point was that Hitler had institutionalized wrongdoing, so resorting to murder would make them hypocrites.
Exactly. He insisted Hitler had to be put on trial legally, and he was quite dismissive, actually. There's a quote where he basically says, "We are all amateurs and would only bungle it."
Wow. That's some serious foresight, or maybe pessimism.
A bit of both, perhaps. But that hesitation, that moral debate, it really plagued the resistance movement for years.
And alongside the moral debates, you mentioned other frictions. Class friction.
Oh, definitely. The sources really hammer this point home. The traditional military elite, the Prussian aristocracy, they often despised Hitler.
Not just disagreed with him, but despised him personally.
Yes. They saw him as this uneducated corporal, a parvenu, a social climber, someone whose, lack of breeding and vulgarity threatened their entire world order, their centuries-old status.
So it wasn't just policy, it was personal and cultural animosity, too.
Deeply cultural. They felt the Wehrmacht was supposed to be a sort of state within the state, independent. Hitler's rise felt like a desecration of that tradition, and it made them politically vulnerable.
Which Hitler exploited ruthlessly in 1938. That early conspiracy you mentioned, it fizzled out partly because army leaders like Halder and Brauchitsch got cold feet.
Yes, their indecision was a factor. And of course, the failure of Britain and France to stand up to Hitler over the Sudetenland appeasement that pulled the rug out from under the plotters, too.
But Hitler didn't just let it go. He sensed weakness and engineered a purge, right?
He did. The Blomberg-Fritsch crisis. It's a textbook example of Hitler's cynical political maneuvering. He used smear campaigns to get rid of generals he couldn't control, generals who were wary of war.
The details are almost unbelievable. First, Blomberg, the Minister of War, his wife.
His new wife, yes, his former secretary. It turned out she had a police record from the morality division relating to posing for pornographic photos, I believe. A past, let's say.
And when Blomberg refused Hitler's demand to divorce her.
Hitler forced his resignation
Yeah.
instantly. It sent shockwaves through the military leadership.
And then immediately after, Fritsch, the commander-in-chief of the army.
Falsely accused of homosexuality, completely fabricated charges based on a case of mistaken identity, which the Gestapo knew.
Didn't Admiral Canaris, head of the Abwehr, try to help Fritsch?
He did. Canaris provided evidence supporting Frisch, and Frisch was eventually exonerated by a military court of honor. But the mud stuck. The damage was done.
Both Blomberg and Frisch were forced into retirement.
Yes, and the result? Himmler's SS gained huge influence, even meddling in army affairs. And crucially, Hitler abolished the position of war minister altogether and declared himself supreme commander of the Wehrmacht.
So he cut off the head, essentially.
Yeah.
Severed the military elite's independent power base.
Precisely. After that, the plotters realized a simple military coup, just taking over buildings, wasn't really viable anymore. Not while Hitler was alive and held that personal command. Assassinations started to look like the only option.
But that realization didn't stop other kinds of resistance attempts, did it? You mentioned Georg Elser earlier.
Right, Elser's attempt in 1939 is fascinating because he was completely outside that military aristocratic circle, an ordinary carpenter acting alone.
Driven by just anti-Nazi conviction.
Deep anti-dictatorial conviction, yes. He spent weeks meticulously hollowing out a pillar in the Munich beer hall where Hitler gave his annual speech commemorating the beer hall putsch.
Planted a bomb, but it failed because of timing.
Exactly. Sheer dumb luck for Hitler. Elser timed the bomb perfectly for the usual long speech Hitler gave. But that night, because of bad weather affecting his fight plans, Hitler cut his speech short and left the hall just minutes before the explosion.
The bomb went off.
Oh, yes. Killed 8 people, caused massive damage. But Hitler was already gone. A fog bank basically saved his life.
And Elser was caught.
Caught trying to cross into Switzerland. And here's a chilling detail. Hitler didn't have him executed right away.
No, why not?
He ordered Elser kept alive, imprisoned until the war was won. The plan was to put him on trial after the final victory, a huge show trial as proof of the depravity of the enemies of the Reich.
Unbelievable. Okay, let's swing back to the military plotters. You said they were a heterogeneous group.
Very much so. Conservative nationalists like Gordeler, yes, but also some liberal Democrats. And they even had feelers out through social democrats like Julius Lieber towards elements of the communist resistance.
Which suggests desperation, maybe?
Yeah.
Or just trying every avenue?
Probably both. But it also highlights the deep political contradictions within the movement. What kind of Germany did they actually want after Hitler?
And this is where we have to get into the uncomfortable details from the sources, right?
Yeah.
About their motivations and their own involvement.
We do, because while some, like Henning von Tresckow, were genuinely horrified by the atrocities, especially Kristallnacht and the mass murder on the Eastern Front,
Others shared some of Hitler's initial goals.
Yeah.
Greater Germany, anti-communism.
yes. And we absolutely cannot ignore the fact that several high-ranking plotters were, well, complicit in war crimes.
Complicit how?
Generals like Stolpnagel in France, Wagner, who was the quartermaster general, Arthur Naby, who led an Einsatzgruppe before joining the plot, Georg Thomas involved in economic planning for occupation. Their duties involved implementing or overseeing policies that led to mass murder.
And even Stauffenberg himself. The sources mention comments he made early in the war.
Yes, in 1939, during the Poland campaign, Stauffenberg wrote about the Polish population in pretty derogatory terms, calling them unbelievable rabble and endorsing ideas of systemic colonization.
So this complicates the narrative of purely moral opposition.
It massively complicates it. It leads some historians to argue, quite persuasively, that for many in the military elite, the primary driver wasn't necessarily stopping the Holocaust or other atrocities which they knew about or were even part of,
But rather,
preventing total military defeat. They saw Hitler leading Germany into absolute ruin, and they wanted to salvage the state, the nation as they conceived it. Their goal was often a conservative, negotiated peace, maybe keeping some of the annexed territories, not necessarily a complete moral or political reversal.
and the government they planned to install. It wasn't exactly democratic, was it?
No. The plans, with Beck as head of state and Gordeler as chancellor, envision a fairly authoritarian conservative regime. They still aim for significant annexations, keeping Austria, the Sudetenland, restoring the 1914 borders with Poland. German hegemony in Europe was still on the table.
So saving Germany from Hitler, but not necessarily creating a modern liberal democracy in its place.
That's a fair summary of the dominant faction's aims, yes. The moral crisis was real for many, but it was intertwined with nationalist and conservative ideals.
Okay, so as the war turns, especially on the Eastern Front, the urgency ramps up. Where does the operational planning really start to solidify?
The nerve center becomes Colonel Henning von Tresckow, serving on the staff of Army Group Center on the Eastern Front.
He becomes the key organizer.
He was the operational engine, yes, systematically recruiting like-minded officers, building a network. And crucially, he made the connection with General Friedrich Olbricht in Berlin.
Olbricht, head of the General Army Office at the Bendler Block, the Army headquarters in Berlin. Why was he so important?
Because Olbricht controlled the Ersatzheer, the replacement army. And critically, the replacement army had its own independent communications network linking reserve units all across Germany and occupied territories.
Ah, so controlling Olbricht's office meant controlling the mechanism for mobilizing troops nationwide.
Exactly. If you wanted to stage a coup that could actually seize control of the state, you needed the Bendler Block and the replacement army's communication lines. That's why Operation Valkyrie was engineered right there.
Okay, so let's get into the mechanism itself, Operation Valkyrie. What's really striking is that they didn't invent this plan from scratch, did they?
No, and that's the genius, or perhaps the cunning, of the subversion. Valkyrie was an official, existing contingency plan.
Designed by Hitler's regime. For what purpose?
For mobilizing the replacement army, the Ersatzheer, in case of a total breakdown of internal order. Think massive uprisings by forced laborers, or chaos caused by Allied bombing destroying communications and control. It was the regime's own emergency plan to maintain control using reserve troops.
And Olbricht and Tresckow just hijacked it.
They hijacked it. They took the existing approved Valkyrie framework and drafted supplementary orders, revised Valkyrie orders that looked perfectly official, coming from the Reserve Army High Command.
How did they plan to make it work? What did these secret orders say?
The success hinged entirely on disinformation. The secret declaration they prepared began something like this. The Führer Adolf Hitler is dead.
Start with the big lie.
The essential lie. And then, crucially, a treacherous group of party leaders implying Himmler, Goering, the SS, has attempted to exploit the situation, to seize power for themselves.
Ah, so frame it as an SS coup attempt.
Exactly. By blaming the SS, they could play on the existing tensions and distrust between the regular army, the Wehrmacht, and the SS. The idea was to trick loyal army units into mobilizing against the SS and the Gestapo, thinking they were actually restoring order and showing loyalty to the supposedly dead Führer.
That's incredibly clever. A psychological judo move?
It was. The detailed execution plan then laid out the immediate seizure of key locations, government ministries, radio stations, telephone exchanges, Gestapo HQs in Berlin, and all the regional military districts. They knew they had to decapitate the Nazi apparatus instantly.
And they were careful about secrecy.
Obsessively careful. Trescow's wife, Erika, and his secretary, Margrethe von Oven, handled all the typing and distribution of these highly sensitive documents. They even wore gloves, the sources say, to avoid leaving fingerprints. The stakes were life and death, absolutely.
But the movement still seemed to lack someone who could actually do the deed, the assassination itself, until Stauffenberg comes along.
Klaus von Stauffenberg. He joined the plot relatively late, mid-1943, but he brought this decisive energy, maybe even a touch of recklessness that the older, more cautious plotters perhaps lacked.
And we have to talk about his physical condition. Severely wounded in North Africa.
Critically wounded. Lost his left eye, his entire right hand, and 2 fingers, the ring, and little fingers on his left hand. The war had literally scarred him.
Did those injuries influence his commitment?
The sources suggest they did. His experiences, especially after the disaster at Stalingrad, seemed to crystallize his view. He came to believe that assassinating Hitler wasn't just politically necessary, it was the lesser moral evil, the only way left to save Germany's honor as he saw it.
And then came the crucial bit of luck, or fate. His new job.
The absolutely decisive factor. On July 1st, 1944, Stauffenberg was appointed Chief of Staff to General Friedrich Fromm.
From being the commander-in-chief of the replacement army, the very army whose Valkyrie plan they were hijacking.
Precisely. This position gave Stauffenberg the plot's most determined potential assassin legitimate, regular access to Hitler's military briefings at the Wolfschanz headquarters in East Prussia. He could walk right in.
It's worth remembering, though, that even with Stauffenberg in place, they had several near misses just in the weeks leading up to July 20th. It wasn't a smooth run-up.
Not at all. We know about the earlier attempts in '43, the bomb on Hitler's plane that didn't go off because the fuse froze.
Right, Operation Spark. And the suicide vest attempt by von Gersdorff that failed because Hitler left an exhibition too early.
Yes, but in July 44, the failures were agonizingly close. On July 7th, General Helmuth Stiff was designated to do it, but apparently he just couldn't bring himself to act. He felt unable, is the word used.
And July 14th, Stauffenberg was ready.
Stauffenberg was there, had the bomb, but the plotters in Berlin, Ulbricht and Beck, insisted that Himmler and Goering had to be killed at the same time as Hitler.
Why? What was the thinking there?
They feared that if Hitler died but Himmler, head of the SS, survived, he would simply unleash the SS and crush the coup immediately. It seemed logical, but...
But Himmler wasn't at the meeting on the 14th.
He wasn't. So Stauffenberg had to abort. A potentially fatal delay, as it turned out.
Because by the next attempt, July 15th, they dropped that condition.
They did. They realized time was running out. The Gestapo was closing in on their network. So Hitler alone would have to suffice. Stauffenberg flew back to the Wolfschanze, bomb ready again.
And what happened this time?
Unbelievable luck for Hitler again. Just as the meeting was underway, Hitler was apparently called out of the room for a phone call or some urgent matter. Stauffenberg had to quickly retrieve the briefcase with the bomb and get out before it was discovered.
They must have been tearing their hair out.
It must have been incredibly stressful. And the pressure was mounting. The Gestapo was making arrests linked to the circle. This is when Treschow sends that final, almost fatalistic message to Stauffenberg and the others.
The one saying they had to go through with it no matter what.
Yes. He said, the assassination must be attempted, coûte que coûte, whatever the cost. He argued that practical success was almost secondary now. What mattered, he said, was that the German resistance movement must take the plunge before the eyes of the world and of history.
So even if they failed, they had to act, to show that someone tried.
Exactly, to leave a moral record. It was a commitment to act, perhaps even a commitment to die trying, to prove that not all Germans followed Hitler blindly.
Which brings us to the day itself, July 20th, 1944. Stauffenberg arrives at the Wolf's Lair, the Wolfschanze, near Rastenburg in East Prussia. This is where 6 years of planning just unravels.
It really does, and the unraveling starts with tiny, seemingly random events. The first piece of bad luck for the plotters, or good luck for Hitler, was a change of venue.
The meeting wasn't in the usual place.
No. Normally, these briefings were held in the Führerbunker, which was underground, reinforced concrete, much more contained.
But that day...
Because it was a hot summer day, the meeting was moved to the main conference barracks, the Loge Barak. Basically, a wooden hut with windows.
And that mattered because...
A wooden building offers almost no blast containment. In the concrete bunker, the explosion would have reverberated, the pressure wave amplified, deadly for everyone inside. In the wooden barrack, the blast would dissipate outwards, through the thin walls, the windows, much less lethal.
So the killing power of the bomb was reduced before Stauffenberg even armed it.
Significantly reduced,
Yeah.
a huge accidental factor.
Okay, so the meeting starts. Around 12:30 p.m., Stauffenberg excuses himself. Needs to change his shirt.
That was the excuse, yes. He went into an anteroom, Field Marshal Keitel's washroom, actually, with his adjutant, Werner von Haften. This was it. Time to arm the explosives.
He was using those pencil detonators, right?
Yeah.
The chemical
Yeah.
ones.
Yes. British-made, ironically. A thin copper tube with cupric chloride acid inside. He used pliers to crush the capsule. The acid starts eating through a retaining wire, and after about 10 minutes, snap. The firing pin releases. Silent, no ticking.
But Stauffenberg had only 3 fingers on his left hand. Using pliers must have been.
Agonizingly slow and difficult. He needed Hefton's help. Remember, he had 2 1-kilogram blocks of plastic explosive. The plan was to use both.
But he was interrupted.
Yes. While they were struggling with the first fuse, a guard knocked on the door, urging them to hurry up. The briefing was starting. Hitler was waiting.
So under pressure.
Under immense pressure and hampered by his injuries, Stauffenberg only managed to successfully prime one of the 2 explosive blocks. He made the snap decision to go with just one.
Leaving the second kilo of explosive unprimed with Hafen.
Correct. He walked into that conference room with literally half the planned explosive power. Another critical reduction in potential lethality.
And he gets into the room. Hitler's there, about 20 officers. He needs to place the briefcase with the bomb.
He manages to get it placed under the heavy oak conference table. Apparently, Major von Freund, Hitler's adjutant, unwittingly helped him move it closer to where Hitler was standing or leaning over the map table.
Close to Hitler's legs. Then Stauffenberg makes an excuse, a prearranged phone call, and leaves the room.
He's out. The 10-minute fuse is burning. Now comes the single most pivotal accidental moment of the entire day.
Colonel Heinz Brandt.
Colonel Heinz Brandt, standing near Hitler. He found Stauffenberg's briefcase bothersome. Maybe it was in his way as he leaned over the table.
Didn't know what was inside, obviously.
No idea. He simply casually used his foot to nudge the briefcase further under the table. But in doing so, he pushed it to the other side of a massive, thick, solid oak trestle support leg for the table.
Placing a huge piece of wood between the bomb and Hitler.
Exactly. That solid table leg became an improvised and tragically effective blast shield.
The bomb goes off. 12:42 p.m.
The explosion demolishes the room. Wood splinters, smoke, chaos. 4 people were killed. Brandt himself died instantly, along with the stenographer. 2 others, including General Schmundt, Hitler's chief adjutant, died later from their injuries. Over 20 people wounded.
But Hitler,
shielded by that table leg. The main force of the blast went upwards and outwards away from him. His injuries were, considering, remarkably minor. Burst eardrums, some bruises, his trousers shredded, conjunctivitis from the smoke. But he was alive, conscious, and basically functional.
And his doctor, Morell, treated him with penicillin captured from the Allies. The ironies pile up.
They really do. Penicillin, courtesy of the enemy.
Meanwhile, Stauffenberg and Hafen outside see the explosion, the smoke.
They assume it worked. How could anyone survive that? They jump in their car. Hafen quickly tosses the second unprimed bomb into the nearby woods during the drive.
They have to get past checkpoints to the airfield.
They bluff their way through 3 checkpoints, basically claiming an emergency, using the confusion after the blast to their advantage. They get to the airfield and are airborne, heading for Berlin by about 1 p.m.
But back at the Wolf's Lair, communication starts to fail. General Feldgiebel, who was part of the plot and controlled communications there.
Yes, Feldgiebel's job was crucial. Shut down communications out of the Wolf's Lair to isolate it, and then signal Berlin that Hitler was dead. He managed to get one brief, perhaps ambiguous, call through to the Bendler block in Berlin.
What did he say?
The message seems to have been something like, something terrible has happened, the Fuhrer is alive, not the clear signal they needed. And then communications were apparently shut down by loyalists, not by Feldgiebel.
So confusion in Berlin.
Total confusion. Ulbricht and the others hesitated. Was Hitler alive or dead? Feldgiebel's message was unclear. Stauffenberg was still in the air, unreachable.
And when Stauffenberg finally lands in Berlin, around 4 p.m.,
he immediately insists he's dead. I saw it myself. This finally galvanizes Ulbricht. 4 crucial hours have been lost. But at 4 p.m., Ulbricht finally issues the Valkyrie orders to mobilize the replacement army.
But their own commander, General Fromm, Stauffenberg's boss, he's hesitant.
Fromm was always playing both sides. He knew something was up. He makes his own call to Keitel at the Wolf's Lair. Keitel confirms Hitler is alive and demanding answers.
So Fromm tries to cover his tracks.
Instantly. He declares the plotters under arrest. Stauffenberg, Ulbricht, and the others have to physically overpower Fromm, arresting him at gunpoint in his own office. They install General Erich Hoepner, another plotter, in his place.
And a coup is finally officially underway, but hours late.
Hours late. And while it starts moving, there's that brief moment of success you mentioned in Paris.
Right. General von Stulpnagel, the military governor of France.
Yeah.
He actually carried out the orders.
He did. Received the Valkyrie orders, acted decisively, disarmed the SD and SS units in Paris, arrested their commanders. For a few hours, Paris was under the control of the conspirators. It showed the plan could work if implemented quickly.
But in Berlin, the center of power,
the delay was fatal. Himmler took charge of countermeasures immediately. He started countermanding Ulbricht's Valkyrie orders. Confusion spread through the military districts. Some commanders, like General von Kurzfleisch in Berlin, flatly refused the order, shouting, "The Fuhrer is alive!" He had to be arrested by the plotters, too.
The tide starts turning against them.
Yeah.
And then the absolutely fatal blow.
Around 7 p.m., Hitler, recovered enough, gets on the phone to propaganda minister Joseph Goebbels in Berlin.
Goebbels, always the key communicator.
Goebbels then contacts Major Otto Ernst Rummer. Rummer commanded the elite infantry regiment Grossdeutschland's Guard Battalion, which was surrounding the government quarter, the key troops on the ground in central Berlin.
And Goebbels puts Rummer directly on the phone with Hitler.
Yes, a stroke of genius, in a dark way. Hitler confirms he's alive, promotes Raymer to colonel on the spot, and gives him direct, personal orders to crush the coup with ruthless force.
Hearing the Führer's voice, getting a promotion.
That was it. Rimmer, who might have been wavering or confused by the Valkyrie orders, instantly snaps to loyalty. He turns his troops around, seals off the Bendler block, and starts arresting the conspirators. The authority of the coup leaders evaporates.
By 8 p.m., the word reaches Field Marshal von Kluge in France that Hitler is alive.
Kluge immediately panics, aborts the coup in Paris, releases the SS leaders Stulpnagel had arrested. It all unravels.
And back in the Bendler block.
Fighting breaks out inside the building itself as officers loyal to Hitler resist. By 11 p.m., Rimmer's troops are in control. The coup has collapsed. The whole armed phase lasted less than, 7 or 8 hours? The aftermath was brutal. Swift, merciless retribution, personally directed by a vengeful Hitler.
Starting that very night, General Frum, the one arrested by Stauffenberg, he's freed by Rimmer's troops.
Yes. And Frum, desperate to cover up his own knowledge and earlier inaction, acts immediately. He convenes a summary, completely illegal court-martial on the spot.
In the Bendler block courtyard.
Right there, under the headlights of vehicles. Just after midnight, Rio Point 1 on July 21st. Ulbricht, Stauffenberg, Haften, and Albrecht Mertz von Quernheim were dragged out and shot by firing squad.
From silencing them before they could talk.
Almost certainly. He needed to eliminate anyone who could implicate him. It didn't save him in the long run, but it was a desperate attempt.
And Stauffenberg's reported last words: "Long live Holy Germany."
Or sometimes reported as "Long live Sacred Germany." Either way, it became a powerful symbol later on. General Beck, the designated head of state, tried to commit suicide, but only wounded himself badly. He had to be finished off by a sergeant. A grim end.
And this was just the beginning of the purge.
Just the very beginning. Hitler was enraged. The Gestapo went into overdrive. Estimates vary, but they rounded up over 7,000 people suspected of any connection, however remote.
And executions.
Around 5,000 were eventually executed. This includes about 200 people directly involved or closely linked to the conspiracy, but thousands more were caught in the dragnet.
And Hitler and Himmler introduced that horrifying concept of Sippenhaft.
Yes, blood guilt, or clan liability. A medieval practice revived. It meant the families of the plotters, wives, children, parents, siblings were held responsible for the crimes of their relatives.
What happened to them?
Many were arrested, their property confiscated, children sent to special homes under false names. Some ended up in concentration camps. It was pure collective punishment, designed to terrorize anyone else in the Wehrmacht who might even think about resistance.
Absolute terror as a tool of control.
Exactly. And the surviving plotters faced the People's Court, the Volksgerichtshof.
Headed by that judge, Roland Freisler.
The notorious Roland Freisler. These weren't trials. They were public humiliations, screaming matches. Hitler ordered the defendants stripped of their uniforms, forced to wear ill-fitting civilian clothes. He wanted them hanged like cattle, he said.
And they filmed these trials.
Yes, filmed for propaganda purposes, to be shown to soldiers and the public as a deterrent. Freisler screamed abuse, denied defendants the right to speak properly. It was utter degradation before execution.
We also saw key figures committing suicide to avoid that fate, or maybe to protect their families.
Yes. Tresckow, the original operational mind, killed himself the day after the plot failed. He staged it to look like he died fighting partisans, specifically so his family wouldn't fall under the Sippenhaft law. A final, calculated act.
And Field Marshal von Kluge, who hesitated in France.
Kluge was recalled to Berlin. Knowing he'd be implicated for his inaction and possible prior knowledge, he took cyanide on the way.
Which brings us to the really complex case. Field Marshal Erwin Rommel. The Desert Fox. How involved was he?
It's still debated. The sources are ambiguous. He seems to have known about the plotting, was likely sympathetic to removing Hitler, but probably opposed the assassination itself. He preferred arresting Hitler.
But he was out of action on July 20th anyway, wasn't he? Injured.
Yes, badly injured days before, when his staff car was strafed by Allied aircraft, so he wasn't actively involved on the day, but his name came up repeatedly during Gestapo interrogations, especially under torture. Stulpnagel mentioned him. His chief of staff, Hofacker, definitely implicated him. His name was in Girdler's papers outlining a potential future government.
So Hitler knew Rommel was connected somehow, but Rommel was hugely popular.
Immensely popular. Germany's biggest war hero at that point. Hitler and Goebbels realized that publicly trying Rommel for treason would be a public relations disaster. It could shatter morale.
So they offered him a deal.
A brutal choice, delivered by two generals to his home in October 1944. Option 1. Commit suicide quietly, using cyanide provided by them. If he did, his family would be unharmed and he'd receive a state funeral with full honors. Option 2. Refuse, face the People's Court, certain execution, and his family would suffer under Sippenhaft.
He chose suicide.
He chose suicide to protect his family. He was driven away, took the cyanide capsule, and the official story was that he died from complications related to his earlier injuries. He got the state funeral. A completely cynical, calculated murder disguised as a hero's death.
So the failure of the plot ultimately just tightened Hitler's grip.
Absolutely. In the short term, it eliminated the last organized internal opposition. Every single member of the Wehrmacht had to re-swear their oath of loyalty personally to Hitler.
And the salute changed.
Yes. On July 24th, just 4 days later, the traditional military salute was abolished and replaced permanently by the Nazi salute, the straight arm Heil Hitler, a hugely symbolic act extinguishing the army's last vestiges of independence.
Hitler even created a medal for it.
He did. Believing his survival was an act of providence, a divine moment, he commissioned the wound badge of 20 July 1944, struck in gold, silver, and black, depending on the severity of the injury for everyone wounded in the blast. A permanent mark of the event.
How is the plot remembered in Germany now? Has the view changed over time?
Oh, profoundly. For a long time after the war, maybe into the 1960s, even 70s, many ordinary Germans still saw the plotters as traitors. Men who broke their oath, who stabbed the army in the back while it was fighting. The post-war government struggled with how to commemorate them.
But that shifted.
Massively. Starting with official recognition, memorials like the Bendler Block itself, and a huge shift in public and historical understanding, especially from the 80s onwards. Today, they are widely seen as heroes, as symbols of the other Germany, the Germany that resisted.
And the German army, the Bundeswehr, commemorates them.
Yes. Symbolically, new recruits often take their oath of service on July 20th, sometimes right there at the Bendler Block where Stauffenberg and the others were shot. They're seen now as upholding a higher moral duty than their oath to Hitler.
So looking back at the whole event, the 20 July plot, it shows resistance did exist right to the heart of the regime.
It absolutely does. A core of resistance driven by this really complex mix of motives, conscience, yes, but also conservative nationalism, political pragmatism, desperation.
And the failure came down to so many small things. Stauffenberg's injuries affecting the bomb priming.
The injuries, the interruption while priming, the decision to use only one bomb, then the change of venue from the bunker to the barracks.
And Colonel Brandt accidentally moving the briefcase behind that table leg.
That single fatal nudge. And then, crucially, the communication breakdown and the 4-hour delay in Berlin issuing the Valkyrie orders.
It really underscores how history can turn on these tiny, chaotic moments. Human error, chance.
Absolutely. But it also proved the plotters' core analysis right in a way. Just killing Hitler wasn't going to be enough.
They knew they had to take down the whole system. The SS, the party.
Instantly. That's why Valkyrie was designed to seize the entire state apparatus. If you try to pinpoint the single biggest failure, was it the bomb failing to kill Hitler or the coup failing to launch effectively?
What do you think? If Stauffenberg had armed that second bomb or Brandt hadn't moved the briefcase, would Hitler have died?
Very likely, yes. The extra explosive or better placement probably would have been lethal, even in the wooden hut. But
would the coup have succeeded even then?
That's the bigger question.
Yeah.
Given the 4-hour delay in Berlin, the confusion, firm's vacillation, even with Hitler dead, could they have overcome Himmler and the SS reacting furiously? It's debatable. The failure to launch Valkyrie immediately and decisively in Berlin, right after the explosion was confirmed, might have doomed the coup regardless. That political hesitation was perhaps the truly systemic failure.
Which brings us to a final thought for you, the listener. We've talked about the plotters' motivations, including their conservative and nationalist aims for a post-Hitler Germany. They still wanted annexations, Austria, Sudetenland, parts of Poland. Their vision wasn't necessarily for a liberal democratic peace across Europe.
So, the provocative question is, if Valkyrie had succeeded, if this group had taken power in July 1944, negotiated some kind of peace with the Western Allies, while likely continuing the fight against the Soviets, how would that have actually reshaped the end of World War II? And would the resulting peace under that kind of German government have truly been better for the continent in the long run? Something to think about.